Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining today's forum event hosted by the Institute of Politics and Public Service at the McCourt School of Public Policy, known to many of you as GU Politics. Tonight, we are excited about the inaugural event for our new series called Ceasefire, where we will prioritize dialogue over debate on some of the most pressing issues of our time. For tonight's inaugural Ceasefire event, we will feature former Atlanta Mayor Bottoms and former South Carolina Congressman Gowdy for a conversation on one of the most profound political divisions facing our country today, the urban-rural divide. This event is being co-sponsored by the Georgetown University College Democrats, Georgetown University College Republicans, and the Georgetown University Bipartisan Coalition. Please join the conversation on social media by tagging GU Politics using @GUPolitics and the official event hashtag #Ceasefire.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, and good evening to you all. A fun thing about Emily and I doing this introduction is, of course, Emily is a very, very smart Democrat from rural West Virginia, and I'm a less smart Republican from New York City. And so it really fits our topic well tonight. It really fits our speakers well to show how people from different backgrounds, different parts of the country, different regions can come together, really have a productive and constructive conversation. So with that, we'd like to introduce our special guest tonight, and I'll start with Mayor Bottoms. So Keisha Lance Bottoms served as the 60th mayor of Atlanta, Georgia, and is a visionary leader in bringing equitable outcomes to the forefront of government and commerce. Keisha became the first mayor in Atlanta's history to have served in all three branches of government, having previously served as a judge and city council member. She has committed herself to realizing her vision of one Atlanta, an affordable, resilient, and equitable Atlanta. Mayor Bottoms served as mayor during one of the most challenging times in the history of Atlanta. In the midst of a global pandemic and a racial justice movement, Mayor Bottoms became a leading spokesperson regarding the challenges and opportunities facing cities and leaders across America. While navigating these unprecedented challenges, the Bottoms administration was able to remain focused on the resilience of Atlanta, negotiating and closing the largest real estate transaction in the history of the city, and one of the largest in the Southeast United States, delivering millions of dollars in community benefits to people across Atlanta. Shaped by a childhood and professional career that highlighted the inequalities amongst Americans, Mayor Bottoms led her administration in undertaking several major initiatives that would seek to eradicate systemic issues facing Atlanta, while also creating a model for all cities to follow. Mayor Bottoms' steadfast leadership and equity-focused philosophy have led to numerous accolades and leadership positions, including having served as the chair of the Community Development and Housing Committee and the Census Task Force for the United States Conference of Mayors, and as a trustee for the African American Mayors Association. She was also selected as chair for the Platform Committee of the 2020 Democratic National Convention and serves as the DNC's Vice Chair of Civic Engagement and Voter Protection. Emily.
Thank you so much, Brady. And next, I have the honor of introducing our second guest for tonight. Trey Gowdy was born in Greensville, South Carolina, and grew up in Spartansburg, South Carolina. He is a graduate of Baylor University with a degree in history and the University of South Carolina School of Law, where he was a member of the Scholastic Honor Society Order of the Wig and Robe. After law school, he clerked for a judge on the South Carolina Court of Appeals and then for a United States District Court trial judge. In 2010, he ran for Congress to represent the 4th Congressional District, Greenville and Spartansburg counties. While in Congress, he served on the Judiciary Committee, Oversight and Government Reform Committee, Intelligence Committee, Education and the Workforce Committee, and Ethics Committee. He was also chosen to chair a select committee on the events occurring in Libya on September 11th to 12th of 2012. While in Congress, he actively participated in numerous congressional investigations, sponsored bills signed into law, and had deep and meaningful relationships with scores of colleagues on both sides of the aisle. After 4 terms in Congress, he announced he would not seek re-election in 2018 and would leave public service for good, thus ending his career with a flawless record in the courtroom and undefeated in political races. In January of 2019, he returned to his beloved South Carolina to practice law, teaches classes with his close friend, Senator Tim Scott, and speak on legal issues he considers important to our country. Mr. Gowdy is an author, host of a television show, and a podcast.
With that, we would like to now welcome Mayor Bottoms and Representative Gowdy. Thank you all, and enjoy the conversation.
Good evening, everyone. Hoya Saxa. Congrats on making it to the end of the semester, y'all. Almost there. And thanks for joining us tonight for our inaugural kickoff event for the new geopolitics series, Ceasefire. I'm going to take a second and just explain what this is all about, because it's a little bit different than I think what a lot of us are used to seeing if you watch cable news. There used to be a show on cable news called Crossfire. Y'all remember that? Which was all about bringing people together from different perspectives and picking a fight between the two of them. The idea of ceasefire is to do the exact opposite. Our goal here, beginning tonight, is to identify some big issues that are dividing our politics, bring two people together from very different perspectives, ask them to lay down their swords, and to have a conversation to help us understand those different perspectives. As we say, this isn't a debate, it's a dialogue. And as we were putting together the concept for the series, we thought of starting with this particular topic, the urban-rural divide, because this is, I think, one of the most defining divides in our politics today. If you look at the last couple of election cycles, one of the biggest predictors of how you voted was your geography, more so than your ideology. The closer you lived to the downtown of a major city, the more likely you voted for the Democratic nominee for president. The further away you lived from the downtown of a major metropolitan area, the more likely it was you voted for the Republican nominee. And when you think about it, if you watch cable news and if you talk to your friends wherever you live, whether it's in an urban or a rural community, you realize that there are a lot of preconceived notions about the people who live in the other. Some of those might be rooted in some truth. Some of them might be total misconceptions. And so that's what we're going to start talking about tonight. It's sort of exploring the rural-urban divide, what voters are looking for, what the people who live in those communities are looking for. Maybe by the end of this conversation, we'll find some commonality, if not in terms of policy prescriptions, at least in terms of motivations. But even if we don't find commonality, that's okay, maybe just with a little bit better understanding of where the other is coming from, we can instill a little bit more respect in the dialogue. That's the goal. Let's find out if it works. I'm incredibly pleased for this kickoff event, for this conversation, to bring two people who are just amazing public servants in their own rights. Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms and Congressman Trey Gowdy, two people who sort of really exemplifies what it means to represent their constituents, coming from very different areas, from very different communities, and who both, when I called each of them to pitch this idea, didn't take very much convincing at all. And to that, I just want to say thank you. So with that, I've got a couple of questions. If I do my job right, I'm not going to speak much more beyond what I just did. I'm going to let you guys do most of the talking. I've got a few questions, but I want to start with a really basic one to each of you. Mayor, what is it that rural voters don't understand about people who live in cities? And Congressman, what is it that people in cities don't understand about rural communities? And let me start with you, Mayor.
So first of all, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I think the biggest misunderstanding is that we are not the enemy. We are not, we're not full of criminals and drug addicts and people who wish to wreak havoc on society. And I base this upon the way that the city of Atlanta is often vilified in the state of Georgia. We are a blue city in a red state. And it's often said there's Atlanta and then there's the rest of Georgia because it's that big of a divide. But the reality is that we care about all the same things. We want safe communities. We want access to health care. We want to be able to send our kids to great schools. And I think we have much more in common than not. But I think that's the biggest misconception, that cities are the enemy and that we are takers and not givers.
Well, I want to start by saying thank you for letting me do it, and thank you to the students for being here, and thank you, Madam Mayor, for being willing to be seen in public with me. You know, when you called me, I thought that you had a sense of humor, because if you added all of the major cities in South Carolina together, I don't think we equal Atlanta. So for me to kind of understand the divide, you know, what's urban in South Carolina, I had 2 of the 5 largest cities in the state in my congressional district, but they're nothing compared really to Charlotte, much less to Atlanta. So I did some thinking. And what I've been able to come up with, Mo, and I'm sure I'm wrong, it's just a question of how wrong I am and who is willing to correct me. I do think there's this natural human nature bent to an us versus them. And I think oftentimes, like when we were in the green room, it's good-natured. There was a reference to somebody being from up north that you know, somebody from down south meant in a good-natured, jocular way. That us versus them is not always good-natured, but I think we're kind of a little bit wired, you know, skins versus shirts. The second thing that popped into my mind is the closer you are to an urban area, I think the more you get to see what your government can do and what your tax dollars can do. And the further removed you are from parks, maybe the less you understand why we need our tax dollars to go for a park. The further removed you are from major highway projects, maybe you question. So I think the size and scope of government and how people view that. And the third point, and the one I don't have an answer for, I think President Bush and President Clinton both won the urban and rural vote. So it's happened in our lifetime, maybe not their lifetime, but our lifetime. So what has changed? I think what has changed, Mo, is there's no longer a desire to persuade people who live in a different zip code that we do have something in common. I think politics now is about ratification and validation and less about persuasion. And if I can win with just the rural vote, why would I ever try to appeal to urban voters? And the contrary would be true also.
I mean, I think there's a lot of truth to that last point. I think we really have moved in our politics to a place where, as you both know, it's cheaper to mobilize than it is to persuade, right? And we see it both in terms of politics and in media. And if you watch the media, if you watch what people would consider progressive-leaning media talk about rural voters, what do you hear? You hear that these are voters who are constantly voting against their economic self-interest. You hear that these are voters who are living in communities that are sort of economically dying and wondering why they don't just move, right, to urban areas or suburban areas. You hear that they are harboring racism, right? And if you watch conservative-leaning media, what do you hear about our cities? I mean, hell, you watch some conservative media and you would think that every city is a burning hellscape right now, right? That is crime-infested, burning hellscape, that it is that is the home of elitism and the woke mob, that it condescends to rural areas. So I think both the media and our political leaders are tapping into and stoking some of that, but they wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't working. They wouldn't be doing it if there wasn't something there in the first place, if people in those communities didn't believe that. So I guess I'm trying to figure out why, right? Why is it that rural voters are so concerned of urban voters? And why is it that urban voters are so concerned about rural voters, I think back to Bobby Kennedy in 1968, who would go out and deliver the same message in Appalachia as he did in inner cities, speaking to sort of the disaffected in both. Why can't we do that today?
I like to think I do it.
Tell us
No,
how, Mayor. Tell us how.
No. Well, my mom always says you only have to tell the truth once. And I found it far easier to be consistent because it really is hard to keep up with a lie. And my vantage point was very different because I was a mayor in a state controlled by the Republican Party. So it did not behoove me not to get along and to work well with our Republican leaders. I remember having a meeting with a leader. I'll tell you when we leave here who it was. We had a great meeting. And he said, and you better not walk out of here and tweet and say we had a good meeting. And I thought, gosh, if only we could say that we had a good meeting. And as I look at David Perdue and Governor Kemp, I think if I were to ever publicly, is this public, considered public? If I were to ever publicly speak about how well we work together and how helpful they both were, it would probably sink both of them, quite frankly. And I think therein lies the challenge, that it's not politically expedient for us to say that we work together. And the reality is, especially with African American seniors, they are often as conservative as it gets on policies, and probably more aligned with rural voters on a lot of policies. But at some point in the course of our nation, it's become popular to say that you don't get along and that you don't compromise. And I think that makes for very poor politics, and I think it hurts our people when we are afraid to publicly say that we work well together or that we've compromised. You look at the 2020 election, Joe Biden won. Joe Biden was a moderate candidate. But if I were to go by social media, based on what my policies were, I did not support defunding the police. But if I looked at Fox News, I looked at social media, I wanted to defund the police. I thought it was a horrible idea, horrible tagline. I didn't want the All-Star game to leave Georgia. I thought that was a bad idea. But if I look at social media, I ran the All-Star game out of Georgia. So I think there's a combination. It's become easier for people to attach tags to you. And I think as elected officials, we don't do enough on our end to push back and say, no, we actually like each other and we work together well. It's not popular to say.
I mean, Trey, a lot of your former colleagues, right, in Congress rail against sort of the urban elite on a daily basis, and Democrats, will do the same in the converse. I mean, what's your take on it?
What I don't know, Mo, is whether that's a supply issue or a demand issue. I don't know if that is how folks that go into politics this day and age are wired, or if they believe that is what the voters want to hear. And some people may argue, well, what difference does it make? Well, I mean, it does make a difference if you are reacting, and I do think politics reacts more than it leads, at least when I was in the House. It was reactionary, and if you thought that was the way to win the primary, and 80% of the districts are primary districts now, they're not general election districts. You got to win the primary, you're not going to win the general. How do you win the primary? I remember during the healthcare debate, there's an ad of Speaker Ryan, whether people like him or not. I do like him, but whether people like him or not, he's pushing the senior citizen off a cliff. I mean, you can disagree with Paul on the Affordable Care Act without thinking that he wants to engage in a genocide of elderly people. What I start with is, okay, what makes someone lean more Democrat or lean more Republican? What made the mayor, when she's got a choice, She says, I identify more with this party. I identified more with that one. I do think it boils down to your view of government and what government is responsible for and what government can and should do. And I may be dead wrong, and I'm talking to a former mayor of one of the largest cities, one of the most vibrant cities in the country, maybe the world. I think the more you see government up close on a daily basis, the more appreciation you probably have for it. I mean, the two cities in South Carolina that are kind of destination cities are Charleston and Greenville. I'd be shocked if those were not the two highest taxed cities in the state. And people can't wait to go to them because of services and infrastructure and the opportunity that you have there. So I think when I am, I don't live in rural South Carolina, but I don't live in a city. I think when I take my own trash to the dump, I have less of an appreciation for trash service. When I don't see the police on a regular basis, I think I probably have less of an appreciation for the need for my tax dollars to go support a robust police force. That's simplistic. I'd rather stay there than think that the us versus them, skin versus shirt divide is getting. President Obama almost won Indiana, if I'm not mistaken, didn't he? That's not an urban.
I think he did the first time. Maybe not the second, but I think the first time.
So there are politicians who can bridge that chasm. There's a New York Times guest editorial today, a state rep in Maine who won in a district that no one thought she could win in because she decided to engage in the art of persuasion instead of ratification. It's just, I don't know if people want to put the effort into it anymore. I mean, she told a story in this op-ed of stopping at someone's house and he essentially ordered her off his property. That was their hello. But she stayed and she had a conversation. At the end of the 30 minutes, he was a supporter. I don't know many folks in elected office that are willing to spend 30 minutes per voter when you can just kind of micro-target using social media.
And the reality is it's exhausting now to be in politics, quite frankly, not to discourage anyone. But nobody is ever satisfied. The left is mad, the right is mad, and those in the middle are quiet. So you are constantly feeling like you're not doing enough, that everybody's angry with you all of the time. Because that is, and I do pretty good about not staying on social media. I used to like to look at social media to see where the pothole was and what was happening in the city. But it would get so toxic coming from the right and from the left. And I remember when I announced that I was not running again, I had someone call me in and say, did we fail you? He said, did we not do enough for you? And I thought that was a really interesting question that I think really speaks to how the silent majority feels. Nobody wants to put themselves in the middle of a fight. Only politicians do that. Regular, normal people don't usually like to be yelled and screamed at. But I do think for the sake of our country, it's going to be extremely important for people with moderate views to be much more vocal, because there's a reason you have a lot of elected officials seeking not to run for office again. Nobody, and I said this when I said this to my husband, I think. I said, I didn't sign up to have fun, but I didn't sign up to be miserable either. And coming out of 2020, there were a lot of miserable days. And you're going to go through tough times. But I think what we are experiencing in our country right now is a tone that I've not felt during the course of my political career. And I would venture to say not even in my lifetime.
Can I say two things
Please.
to pick up on what the mayor was saying? And one of them would not relate to what she just described because it's more indigenous to Congress. I think 80% of the congressional races are decided by more than 10 points, which is a landslide in politics. 10 points is a landslide. 80% are landslide districts, which means the primary is all that matters. And Mo, if you were running someone's campaign on the Democrat side, would you tell them to be more moderate or would you tell them to be more progressive? I can assure you what I would tell them on the right is the most conservative candidate usually wins. To your other point, I think maybe it was different in Atlanta, but so who sets the expectations for whether you are doing a good job or not? I can tell you on the right, the expectations are set by people primarily who've never run for office, never held office, and never cast a vote on a piece of legislation. I wonder how many people that set the expectations for what a good mayor should be have ever been the mayor.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, we poll all of the time. So when I made the decision not to run, my poll numbers were at 68%, which was incredible coming out of 2020 and all that we had been through. So I was in a very interesting position because I could have run again and very likely would have won. But you know, the self-analysis, why did I run for office? I ran for office because I wanted to do good. I wanted to do better for my communities. And at some point, when you feel as if your best is not good enough, it begins to wear on you. Despite the fact that the 68%, it was, the best word that I have is, it was exhausting. And it doesn't mean that I won't ever run for office again. I'm not stepping out of politics likely forever, but I needed to put a period on that season just for self-care. And I think that's what you see happening with a lot of people who are deciding not to seek re-election right now.
You got two people here tonight, both of, well, I don't want to speak for myself, but she would have won re-election. I might have, I don't know. I tell you this, I would not have lost in the general. Now, could I have lost in a primary to someone that said, you know, I'll give you $1 if you can guess the most contentious vote I cast the 8 years I was there. You'll never guess what it was. The most contentious vote I cast was for John Boehner for Speaker of the House. And he was the only nominee for Speaker of the House. So the fact that the two of us left unindicted and undefeated should tell you something about the state of politics. Question is, how do you fix it? Clinton, Bush both won the urban and rural vote. It can be done. It cannot be done if you make no effort to do it and if you're not interested in doing it.
So we're going to get to student questions soon, and they always ask better questions than I do. But I want to throw a couple of issues out there that I think kind of exemplify the urban-rural divide, some of which I don't understand why. So maybe we can talk it through a little bit. I'm going to start with one that still baffles me. COVID. I mean, if there's an issue that should be unifying us as a people, where there's a clear common adversary, it is a pandemic. And yet you look at the divide between left versus right, but really pronounced in urban versus rural in how we mitigate and how we have been mitigating the pandemic. And I try to wonder why, and sometimes I think, like, is this really come down to just the basic argument of individual freedom versus collective responsibility? Or is it something else? And I don't know the answer to that. So I'd love to hear from each of your perspectives, right? Why we are so divided, why urban versus rural is so divided, and how we tackle this pandemic.
Look, I am not an epidemiologist, but that does not keep most people on television from
Right,
talking
yeah, no,
about
we all
issues.
pretend to be, yeah.
So I'm going to do it anyway. I would imagine the more you live around other people, the more interested you are in masks. I can tell you that I'm much more of a fan of masks when I'm on an airplane than I would be if I was in the backyard chipping golf balls. So the more you're around people, I think, I'm guessing the urban voter is more interested in restrictions than the rural voter. I have no explanation for vaccine numbers other than a distrust of government, in which case I would say see answer A. The closer you are to government, probably the less distrustful you are of it. My father's a medical doctor. I got both vaccines. The booster, I'd get one today if you offered it to me, and it gave me another week. But I'm in the minority among people that live in rural areas when it comes to the vaccine.
Now, a bit of honesty, I was surprised to see you with a mask on because of assumptions and stereotypes. I was very surprised, pleasantly surprised, but I was surprised. So even in coming here to have this discussion, I still made assumptions, which goes back to what you said about these inherent ideas that we have about who people are and what they think and what they feel. But I can tell you there were many alarming conversations I had in my city, in African-American community. There were sometimes I would stand in my kitchen and I would look at my son. I'm like, what, you listen to QAnon? Like, what are you talking about? Because his ideas about COVID and the things, now my younger kids say that he just says things just to bother me. That he really doesn't believe half of what he says, but he only does it for me. But Easter, I had a cousin come over who's not vaccinated, so I demanded that he take a test, and my very smart cousin explained to me why he can't get COVID, based on nothing other than the fact that he believes he can't get COVID. Other than that, he's brilliant. So that divide is there were a lot of people, rural, urban, all races, who had some really crazy ideas, in my opinion, not based on science as it relates to COVID. And ironically, at the beginning of the pandemic, the governor asked me to lead his task force on homelessness. We were working together quite well, right up until we weren't. And at some point, I began to go, who is this guy? He was getting one set of information, I was getting another set of information, and that's when you saw a very public split on the pandemic. But in my mind, it's like, it's science. Let's look at the science. I also, at some point, quite frankly, began to think maybe it's because maybe I am so very sensitive to this because I could see the numbers in the African-American community. Now, there are other reasons that, when you look at minority populations, often congregate living conditions, underlying health conditions, and all these things that made COVID-19 more deadly in minority populations. But I began to wonder if this virus were killing people at the rates that we're seeing in cities, in rural communities, would the response have been the same? I don't know the answer to that.
I don't either, and I am tempted by the individual liberty versus collective responsibility argument. I'm tempted by it. And I'd be shocked if the majority of the women and men who sign up to serve our country in uniform did not come from rural areas. In fact, I think they do. So immediately I have impeached my own idea that there's this lack of interest in a collective responsibility. I mean, I used to talk about it, Mo, but I think it fell on deaf ears, or maybe nobody was watching. Even if I'm not doing it for my own well-being, I'd wonder what the church attendance rate of rural people would be. My guess is it'd be pretty high. So why is it not enough to do it to help someone else, even if you don't think it's going to help you? I mean, that's all the major religions teach that. I don't have an answer other than, you mentioned follow the science. I admit I was vexed. You correct me on my geography. I think there are parts of the District of Columbia that actually abut Maryland and Virginia. And there may even come a point where they all kind of sort of come close to one another, maybe. So why, if you're following the science, would you have 3 different policies? I do think that science in some ways, science in quotes, in some ways, is the ultimate casualty of the pandemic. It used to be unifying. I mean, there's not a person in this room that hadn't been inoculated against something. I mean, I got an arm full of shots when I was a kid. I never said a word about it. I get flu vaccine every year. I don't know why this vaccine became a political issue other than we're in an environment where we are dying for us versus them ideas, arguments.
All right, I want to get to the student questions. I want to throw out 2 more issues, though. While I'm doing that, feel free to start lining up at the microphones. There's one in each aisle, and we'll get to you in a second. But I want to throw out 2 more issues where I feel, I mean, there's so many I could go to, but 2 more issues where I feel like the urban-rural divide is really pronounced. The economy, right? I mean, you listen to sort of the conventional wisdom, the narrative is that urban areas are the economic hubs of the country. They are generating the GDP. They are generating all the economic growth. They are getting all access to capital. And the rural communities are getting screwed. I remember taking Mark Warner when he was running for governor of Virginia back in 2001 to a peanut factory down in southeast Virginia. And the guy down there saying, you know what our #1 export is down in this part of the state? Our young people. That they can't get jobs here, they're all leaving for the cities, right? So this is 20 years ago. But at the same time, poverty isn't just a rural issue, right? There are a lot of people in urban areas that are struggling with access to opportunity, to economic opportunity. So why this pronounced divide between urban and rural? Where is there some commonality there?
I think there's certainly an interconnectivity. I think there are rural voters that drive to the cities for jobs because manufacturing jobs have left certain, we've moved to a service-based economy. So if you want work, you drive into the city. I think that may wind up being the best hope for curing the divide, is the more time you spend around people, not like yourself, the more appreciation you have for them. The interstates in my state, if the interstate passed you by when they were building the interstate, those communities are dead. They're gone. So it's not volitionally us versus them. It is a consequence of the loss of manufacturing. It is a consequence of where we put the interstate systems. Like, if you think that your life is not going well, you can look at yourself or you can blame an exterior force. And I think the temptation is to sometimes want to blame an exterior force.
Now, I'll give you another example, affordable housing. When I went over to the state legislature to talk about my agenda, I debated, should I talk about affordable housing? Going to meet with the Republican leaders, mostly from rural communities. I thought they will not want to hear about Atlanta's affordable housing issue. I was dead wrong for several reasons. One, I assumed they would not want to hear about it, but they were very interested. One, because they all had to come into the city during the session, so they were looking for housing. Secondly, just what you mentioned, their kids and their grandkids were moving into the city, so housing was an issue. There were people, even from the metropolitan area, the second grade teacher couldn't afford to live in the city. She was driving an hour. So all these reasons that made people care, but I could have stopped in my office in City Hall and just said, They don't want to hear about this. They don't care about affordable housing, not going to even bring it up. But I did, and it was a very productive conversation. So I think oftentimes we've got to get out of our own way in making assumptions about what people care about. It may not be for the same reasons that I care, but oftentimes, again, there's much more commonality than we often give people credit for.
I'm going to throw out one more issue, and then we'll go to the students. Race. A lot of times when people talk about urban versus rural, they talk about white versus non-white. And a lot of that got spilled out into the public discourse in a real way in the summer of 2020. Mayor, you were on the front line of sort of that conversation in a very real way down in Atlanta. But I think it's even more nuanced, as every other issue is, right? 20% of people who live in rural communities are people of color, right? President Trump didn't just win white rural America, he won a majority of white America, urban and rural. So it's a little bit more nuanced than just white, non-white, rural, urban. Would love just your thoughts on how that divide, right, the race and geographic divide plays out.
You know, my mom said to me at some point during 2020 that it felt like 1965 to her all over again. And that was heartbreaking to hear that. So I believe that what Trump did and made popular in our country was division. My concern is that that was not a one-time event. I don't know how we turn the corner from that. It's like he put a torch to it, and it's taken hold, and it just doesn't seem to be going away. And that worries me. I was very hopeful with the election because I thought, okay, well, you know, we're kind of coming back to some sense of normalcy. But I don't know how long that will last because, again, it's not popular. It's not popular to work together and get along. Extremes are popular, and that concerns me.
When I think about Mr. Clyburn, who represents a large geographic part of South Carolina, much of which is rural, and I don't know. As you know, Mo, Tim Scott is not only my best friend in politics, he's the man that will preach my funeral, but I don't pretend to be able to see issues of race through the eyes. The best hope I have is to borrow the eyes of someone who's lived it. So I don't have an answer to that. I will say this. I think even before President Trump, we figured out that the divisiveness is not just good for politics, it's good for business, it's good for television, it's good for newspapers. I think you started by saying, is there a constituency for compromise? And I don't think there is. And so what we have to ask ourselves, is that a supply problem or demand problem? Is it we're not getting it, but we want it, or have we stopped wanting it? And I don't have the answer to that. I know this. I spoke about it last night on a very lightly viewed television show that I host. But I think redistricting is going to give you a House of Representatives that consists of the Squad and the Freedom Caucus. And so if I were going to fix something in our politics right now, I would probably fix the way political lines are drawn. And make it where you actually have to talk to people that may not currently agree with you to be successful.
I want to come back to that point, but let's start taking some student questions. So we'll start over here and then go over there. Tell us who you are, your name, your school, what you're studying, where you're from, and then your question.
Hi, my name is River. I'm from Atlanta, actually, so my question is for you, Madam Mayor. I'm a sophomore in the School of Foreign Service. in my question, and once again, thank you for being here. Lived in Atlanta my entire life, so it's an honor to see you here. My question for you is this. 2 years ago, many of us in Atlanta were maybe expecting you to either still be mayor or to be in Joe Biden's cabinet or maybe even vice president. So what do you think that you have maybe learned during your time out of office, and what do you think the future holds for you?
First of all, what high school?
Chamblee.
All right. I learned more than I ever expected to learn because there was no playbook coming out of 2020. And I think in many ways, for as frustrating as it was for me to watch President Trump, it made me a stronger leader because I had to rely on what I knew and often what I didn't know and to figure it out. And I don't know that I would have had to work that hard as a leader under a different president. So I learned so much about myself. I also learned intuition is a superpower. Women especially often dismiss feelings because we think it makes us weak and it's not tangible. But I learned that it's a gift, that sometimes you won't have all of the facts, that you just have to make decisions based on what you think and what you feel, and I learned that did not fail me. In terms of the future, I'm still trying to figure it out. I haven't had a break yet from being mayor. I'm still going full speed. So I think once I settle down, I'm a woman of faith. I think if God were to give me a message, I'd be too busy to listen to it right now. So I think when I take the time to slow down, I'll have some clarity on what my next will be.
You mean you didn't come here to make an announcement tonight?
I did not. Yeah, we're going to run on a ticket together.
Look at that. You heard it here first. You heard it here first.
And then somebody will make this into a commercial and he'll never win again.
I can promise you I'll never win again because I'll never run again.
All right. Thanks for the question.
Thank you both for being here today, and I'm incredibly excited, just for the future of this program because Ceasefire brings a lot of interesting voices and perspectives together. My name's Joe Massawa. I'm a freshman in the School of Foreign Service. Originally hailing from Philadelphia, which is an urban area, but my family's from Maine, rural area. So I really appreciate you mentioning Chloe Maxman, who is a bright hope for the future of Maine. And my question is, we face a lot of different issues. So you have the issues of broadband in Maine, or you have the issues of homelessness and food insecurity in Philadelphia. But you also have shared issues. You have shared issues of healthcare, of misinformation. So what advice do you guys have for young leaders such as myself who are seeking to navigate the current political space, and how can we bridge divides and hope to sort of take different issues, meld them together, and create a policy plan that'll work for all Americans from wherever you are, wherever geographically you're living?
When I hear policy, I think you, because I was a lawyer. I'm not good on policy, so I'm gonna let you take the policy. I can take the politics, but I'll let you take the policy.
No, I would just say be a truth teller, and you all. You know what your issues are. I find out more in my kitchen about what people care about between my kitchen and my mother's kitchen than I do from any poll in any round table in the mayor's office. And I would say, because you're such savvy students, you're savvy young people, take what you know to be the challenges and then work to find solutions. Because the reality is that as elected officials, we can get lazy sometimes. We're often dealing with what's in front of us and not thinking 10 steps ahead. But some of the best policies that I was able to create came from people telling me what needed to be done. My affordable housing plan came from someone saying, hey, I think you can set aside, you can make a goal of $1 billion towards affordable housing. I thought, that's crazy, I can? And by the time I left in 4 years, we were over 700 million in. Cash bail bond, eliminating cash bail bond in Atlanta. Someone came to me and said, you really need to look at this. And I did. I said, yeah, this is impacting poor people. This is a penalty on poor people. And we did it. So you know what the issues are. You know what people care about. And you also know how to disseminate the truth in ways that I never could. I don't know how to get on Snapchat. I don't know how to do TikTok. But you do.
This is a tough political environment, if that's what you're thinking about going into. It may be different, but by the time you run. What I would tell you is to embrace the reality that there's a difference between losing and failing. And if you run as what you are, you just mentioned Easter. I think I'm right on this. I think he lost a voice vote to a guy named Barabbas. So anybody can lose. The question is, are you willing to lose as what you are? The statistic, I'm not big on polls, but this one caught my attention. 2/3 of all Democrats don't have a single Republican friend. And 2/3 of all Republicans don't have a single Democrat friend. If I'm trying to understand why someone voted for President Obama twice, I don't know who I would ask except someone who did. If I'm trying to understand why someone voted for President Trump twice, I don't know who I would ask except someone who did. So policy, it's also smart politics. It is hard to hate someone that you know. It's hard. So I would bring in my worst critics, and I would engage them. They may not support you. They may not vote for you, but they may be closer to neutral, and that's a victory too. So when I say it's a tough political environment, the experts will tell you the way to win is go identify your voters and to get them out and suppress the votes on the other side. The question is, do you want to win or do you want to make a difference? If you want to make a difference, then reject that mindset and engage in the art of persuasion. Try to persuade people that your way is better, and just understand there's a difference between losing and failing. Every hero I have is lost. There's no shame in losing.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you so much for speaking with us today. When you said that thing about friends across political lines, I saw like 4 people do fist bumps, so I think that's a good start. But I'm just curious, what do you think news organizations and journalists can do to limit detrimental impacts on the urban-rural divide, and how do you think that journalists and news consumers can play a role in that?
You both now work for cable networks.
I think we have to sort out whether it's a supply issue or a demand issue. I tend to think that the media, not unlike Congress, reacts. They think, keep in mind, you can have a fabulously successful show on any cable news network with a couple of million voters. You're not going to win any election. You're not going to win any national elections, but you'll have what they call a successful news show. Look, I'm trained as a lawyer. I did that a whole lot more than I did anything else. I would cross-examine everything I hear, no matter what show it is, including my own. You should ask, how do you know that? And what are the limits of your knowledge? You should ask that anytime anyone says something on television or anywhere else. Cross-examination is the most powerful tool we have to elucidate the truth and understand that just because something is said does not, what did my dad tell me? Don't believe anything you hear and only half of what you see. Don't assume because it's said in a serious voice with a lot of gravity that it's true. Cross-examine everything.
And again, I think we see things through our own lens. So I would say CNN is pretty neutral. lot of people wouldn't say that CNN is a neutral network, but it is to me. And again, because that's the lens that I'm looking through. And I think, again, we have to demand more. So we speak with our dollars. We support networks or don't support networks. And it impacts the bottom line. And I think that when we demand more, we get more in return.
It's tough because there's so
Can I
few
throw one
neutral
more thing
networks.
at you?
So sorry. Oh, yeah.
I would give some thought to supporting individuals as opposed to networks or newspapers. If you find a columnist that you think is fair, no matter where she writes.
Good point.
You mentioned CNN. I don't want to get him in trouble, but Bakari Sellers has been a friend of mine for probably 15 years now. He's a very, I think, by anyone's standard, progressive commentator on CNN.
See, I don't think Bakari's progressive at all.
For South Carolina, he's pretty progressive. But I have never had a crossword with Bakari. We just decided friendship. Look, he's never going to vote for me, but then again, he should not. He shouldn't vote for me, and I shouldn't vote for him. But you can get along with someone and you can support them. Something happened to him recently, and I texted him and said, I'm thinking about you. And he's made the mistake of supporting me publicly, which was a dumb thing for him to do, but he did it anyway. Pick people that you think are worthy of your trust as opposed to institutions.
Yeah, I do wonder on this point, so much of our national political dialogue is being driven by media outlets that are either New York or DC based. And you're seeing local press, even in metropolitan areas, local press, and especially in rural areas, local press around the country really taking in the shorts, right? I mean, it is a slow, painful death that you're seeing out there. And I wonder how much of that is driving this, right? If New York and DC are dictating the terms of the debate and we're losing the local nuance, whether it's in a major city or in a rural community, it changes the nature of our discourse. It changes the nature of the debate on these issues, and people start thinking about it a little bit differently. So, okay, over here.
All right, my name is Tyler, and I'm originally from a farm in Wisconsin, and now I'm here studying economics. But I'm from a farm in Wisconsin, and now I'm with the Georgetown Bipartisan Coalition. So this issue really hits home for me, and so I want to thank you for having an event on it tonight. Really means a lot. My question for you, when we think about bitter polarization like this and geographic divides, people tend to blame the internet. I've lost track of how many times tonight you guys have mentioned social media in a negative tone. But it's difficult to go out into your local community and have a conversation with people who disagree with you when our local communities are now sorted into red America and blue America. So my question for you is, to what extent can social media be a force for good and for healing? And what needs to change in order for that to happen, both policy-wise and culturally?
Yeah, again, there's an opportunity to spread truth via social media. But social media also has its limits. I talk about my best polling sources. If I was on CNN today, I promise you my son didn't see me. He doesn't even watch TV. He gets everything on his phone. My mother saw me. If I posted it on social media, she would never see it because she's not on social media. So I think it's important in the same way we run campaigns. When we run campaigns, we knock on doors, we get on the radio, we're on television, we're on social media, we mail, we phone bank, we do it all. I think if we did a better job doing that, not just in campaign season, then I think we would be better off as a country. I think that we could communicate better with our constituents. They would understand that we're not all bad. Washington's not awful. All elected officials aren't crooks. But when we only spread information when it's campaign season, I don't think it helps us very much.
I would, as someone who's not on social media at all, this will be a very short answer. I think that technology is benign. It's how you use it. I think social media is great for raising issues. I have not seen that it's great for resolving them. And I think I said it last night. How many do we get? 280 characters on Twitter? You can share your thoughts with the world as long as you can reduce them to 2 sentences or 3 sentences. I just think issues oftentimes are more complicated than that. And so, having said that, both my kids are on it. I haven't seen their eyes in probably 5 years, either one of them. I don't even know what color eyes my daughter has because they're always looking down. But I'm a dinosaur. It's great for raising issues. I would, from a mental health standpoint, I would be very careful letting what someone who does not know you well thinks or says about you have any impact on your life at all. And I would say that to all young people. Not just young people. I saw my colleagues flipping through Facebook and they read 9 positive comments and then they focus on the negative one, but none of the 10 know them. So why do they care? The chances of you being the smartest person in the world or the dumbest person in the world are not great, unless you know everyone in the world. I don't know how you would know that. So, this is heretical for me to say, particularly to a group this age. Social media, I would use it to raise issues. I don't know that it's that helpful in terms of resolving them.
All right, we're running short on time, so apologies. We're going to do one more from each mic.
Social media.
And then for those of you that were behind that, I apologize. We'll go here, and then wrap up.
Hi, my name is Tom. I'm from the general public, I guess. I found it on Eventbrite, but my...
Did you see my tweet?
No. But my question is, there's a lot of talk about compromise and coming to the center. If that's not popular, if both sides are on the extremes, why not have some sort of national divorce, or at least a system where one side's not dictating terms to the other? Because if we're going to have a divorce, it seems like an abusive relationship right now, especially for conservatives who might have a referendum on illegal immigration or homosexual marriage, only for some federal judge or justice far away to overrule the will of the people.
I don't know that we're headed for divorce. I still naively think that if you put 2 people beside each other, as we have done tonight, and we were to go through life, we would have exponentially more in common than we do not. I can tell you we have one big thing in common. You mentioned faith. You can build a relationship on nothing but that. You can build a relationship on nothing but the fact that we're both parents. I just think we're in an environment where we kind of run to what we disagree on. So I'm not into a national divorce. I think we tried that once. It had disastrous results. I think we are one nation, indivisible, and we got to start talking to people with whom we don't currently agree. And even if there is no reconciliation on the issue, I don't think the mayor and I are going to agree on certain issues no matter how long we talk. But I think it is really hard to hate someone you know. So I'm not into a national divorce, but maybe that's just the old-fashioned Southern Baptist in me.
Yeah, I do think it's about grace. I think we also have to give room for people to grow. And I don't think we're often willing to do that. So we say we want people to understand us, we want to know each other better, and then when they ask a question that may be insensitive, then we're done. I don't think we can do that because you're not giving people room to grow and to understand you better, and you're going to ask some dumb questions. I made the mistake a few weeks ago on social media. I said, I'm on the fence about complete student loan debt relief. May not be a popular question or statement in this room, but I said I'm on the fence. Like I want to know more. And people went nuts. And someone said, didn't you know you can't have logical discussions on Twitter? And a woman said, I would love to send you more information, and she did, and I was very grateful for that. But I ended this evening, it was the night of the Oscars, so Will Smith slapped Chris Rock, and then I forgot all about it. But I ended the Twitter discussion by saying this is the first and last time I will engage in a Twitter discussion because it was completely pointless. But thankfully, someone said, I want to send you more information, and she sent it to me in my DM, and which was great. So my point is, you got to give people an opportunity to say, oh, I don't know how I feel about that. I want to learn a little more. And then you got to let them learn a little more and ask questions without trying to chop their heads off, too. Not just on Twitter, but in general.
All right, let's go here, and then I've got a wrap-up question.
Hi, my name is Sanjana. I'm a freshman in the School of Foreign Service. I was raised in the Bay Area, so not very rural. And I think coming to Georgetown and joining the Bipartisan Coalition was the first time I was friends with someone who was pro-life. First time I was friends with someone who was like conservative. First time I made a friend from a rural area. But I understand that me being able to do that and have my perspective shaped is a privilege that I get by coming to a school like Georgetown. And so I guess my question for you is, what do I get to go home and tell my family or my friends back home who on a day-to-day basis don't see or meet rural people? What do I tell them to do to kind of bridge that divide on their own personal intellectual level?
I like to start. Is there any chance you're going to wind up being a lawyer in life?
Possibly.
All right, good. The best lawyers are the ones who are always one fact away from changing his or her mind. And there are very few people in the world, I think. I was at an event in Dallas, and I said, I am one fact away from changing my mind on any issue. And that was not a popular thing to say. They view that as a lack of conviction, a lack of you really believing something. Lawyers should always be one fact. It needs to be a good fact. So I would ask people in my family or in my sphere, if you want to be the most knowledgeable person you can be, use the example I gave. If you don't know anybody that voted for President Obama, who else would you ask other than someone who did? I don't know that people who voted for Mitt Romney, John McCain and Mitt Romney, I don't know that they could tell you how President Obama was elected twice, overwhelmingly. And I don't know how anyone who did not vote for President Trump could tell you how he won in 2016. So it's not even really, it's about improving yourself, making yourself a better advocate. If you don't know the facts on the other side of the issue, I don't think you're going to be as good a lawyer or as good an advocate as you can be. So how else would you find it out if you don't talk to somebody who disagrees with you?
And I think the fact that you are in a bipartisan group speaks volumes. You go home and say, hey, I met some people who don't think like me and they're okay. And I think that makes a difference.
Thanks for the question. All right, we're over time, so thank you for indulging us. I want to ask one last question of each of you, though. Let's say you both are back in your old jobs. What's one issue that you think you could lead with to help bridge this divide between urban and rural? One issue that you as a mayor could take to some rural lawmakers and find some commonality. One issue that you as a congressman representing a significant urban community could take to someone who represented an urban community and find some commonality. Where can we start to bridge these divides?
I think the issues I think we're already there. We just don't speak of it in those terms. So we all want health care, quality health care. We want quality education. We want safe communities. So I think we're there on what we want. How we get there together, I think, is the bigger question. I think we agree on a lot. I don't think we message it as agreement.
Mo, I would say having a justice system that is not only respected but worthy of our respect, proportional, just, fair, in the eyes of all parts of the American family. But part of that is I'm insulated from a little bit of criticism because none of my critics have put anybody in jail. I know what it's like. I know what our justice system could be like, what it should be like. There is, I think, granted, this is not the best atmosphere to be talking about criminal justice reform, but that is because you start with this big precept. I mean, do you believe in proportionality? Do you believe in fairness? Do you believe in that lady blindfolded holding a set of scales? I don't think anyone, no matter where they live, is going to say, no, I don't believe in that. So you have agreement on a broad, you mentioned healthcare. I don't know anyone in the world who thinks that you should be denied healthcare based on your ability to pay. I would hope not. I would hope there's no constituency for letting people die. So if you can get consensus on that broad issue, and then you can begin to build consensus on how we get there, Mo, in this environment, we don't talk about a healthcare or a justice system. We want to go to those issues that we disagree on and are probably not going to solve, because that is better for politics, it's better for fundraising, and it's probably better for media.
And I just want to add two more things, just I think are noteworthy. You mentioned criminal justice reform. A lot of our criminal justice reform in Georgia came from Nathan Deal, Republican governor. Voting. We had motor voter registration in Georgia. You get a license, transfer your license, you can register to vote. 800,000 voters put on the voter roll. It came from Nathan Deal's policy. So there are these issues that are important to all of us, that there's commonality there. I think we just need to be bolder as leaders and less timid in what we know our communities need and what our people are asking for, and push for it.
Can I ask the mayor one question?
Please.
There was a U.S. senator that told me one time, you should never tell the voters they're wrong. But if you're meeting with a group and you do think they're just mistaken, that they don't have all the facts. I mean, the reason I told that young man it's okay to lose is because if winning is all you want to do, maybe you don't have those frank conversations with someone and say, you know what, you don't have the right facts. Your facts are wrong. How did you tell people that you thought they were mistaken?
Someone on my team recently said, someone asked what was the hardest thing about working for me, and he said working for a politician who doesn't care about politics. So that was easy for me because I didn't do the politics well, because I would have those conversations and I would say, well, that doesn't make much sense. And it, didn't always work out well for what I wanted to get done. But I did it because, again, going back to what my mother always tells me, you only have to tell the truth once. So I found it far easier. I always wanted to be able to sleep at night. Good, bad, and indifferent. I wanted my soul to be well with decisions I made. And if that meant telling someone that they were wrong or not misleading someone, having them walk out of a room thinking I'm going to do one thing and then do another, that was important to me. How did you do it?
I took Ambien. That's how I slept at night. I tried to do it with questions. When I left Congress, I could have written a book about, well, that's not true. I could not have written a book about anything in the world because I don't know that much. But I wrote a book about persuasion, how to use questions to change people's minds. Yeah, well, it's now available in paperback. So the big issue when I was there was impeaching President Obama. I mean, I had constituents that would line up to want to know why I wasn't doing more. And then it was Koskinen after that, it was the IRS commissioner, and then it was someone else. So I tried to use questions, like I was, not cross-examination, but questions to try to get them to see the illogic of where they were headed. I was not good at saying, like, Mick Mulvaney, who's a Georgetown graduate, and whatever other flaws he has, and he's got a bunch of them, but he's very, very blunt. I mean, he would say, well, that's just wrong. You're wrong. I don't know what it was. I'm just never good at just telling a group of people sitting around a conference room table, you're wrong. I would use questions to try to prove to them that maybe their facts weren't reliable. If I'd been as tough as you, or my mom did not tell me, she probably did tell me it was easier to keep up with the truth, but I wasn't paying attention. I was doing something else, so I don't remember that.
There's so many issues that we didn't get to tonight that I was hoping we might. Everything from the environment, we touched on healthcare a little bit, so many others. So we're just going to have to bring you back to continue this conversation at some point. Our motto, our slogan at the Institute of Politics and Public Service is, public service is a good thing, politics can be too. Past couple of years, that's been tested, I think, quite a bit. We're hoping more conversations like this might show us the way back. So, Mayor, Congressman, can't tell you how much it means to all of us here that you were helping us kick off this series and gave so much of your time and your wisdom to us. Thank you both for being real public servants. And to all of you, thank you for spending part of your evening with us. This is it. Finals coming up. Good luck to all of you on finals. And stay tuned. Keep following at GU Politics. We will be continuing the Ceasefire series in the fall. Thank you all very much.